Tieši tā. So, ladies and gentlemen, last but certainly not the least speaker of the session, buckle your seatbelt, Dorothy, is led by Mr. Mischa Koster, who is the Chief Psychology Officer at the Grey Matters. And in his daily life, he delivers speeches on consumer psychology, social psychology, media psychology, nudging behavior influence, escalation prevention, fake news, and social engineering. He's also a jury member for Digital Communication Awards, co-founder of the TEDx Utrecht, and certified micro-expression recognition expert. So, Mr. Koster, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. Oh, please hold with the applause until after I've hopefully earned it, okay? Encouraging, okay, that's nice of you, thank you. So thanks for having me here at Cyberchess in the beautiful Riga. I've been here before, always love it. First of all, I want to start out with sharing my belief with you. I think psychology is like the motor oil of organizations, maybe even of society. I think that without the use of psychological insights or psychologists within your organization, you probably won't go bankrupt, or you will go out of business, or your information will be like totally unsecure. But I do think that if you use insights from psychology, that you will outperform the way you used to do things, or even outperform your competitors in doing things. So I think psychology is an area of expertise that has a lot of like hidden gems in it that are now mostly refined to like the scientific community and not getting out there. And part of my job is to get those kinds of insights out there. And I'm not the only one who thinks of this this way. I think it was Forbes magazine who already wrote, like in 2010, psychology, the science of mind and behavior, permeates businesses on many dimensions, from negotiation to sales to product design. In its simplest form, business is psychology. Business is psychology. And in terms of what we're here for today, I also think that security is psychology. So actually, I think, and I believe that if you have like a regular organizational structure, like something like this, you would have a board of directors and some people below that with like a C in front of their names, like CEO or CFO or whatever. And my challenge for you is to discover whether you could like put a chief psychology officer next to that. Somebody with a psychological academic background, maybe even PhD, who knows how to apply all these valuable insights from psychology in the most effective but also in the most ethical way throughout the entire organization. So having said that, well, you already gave me this wonderful introduction, so I don't have to do anything like that myself. My name is Mischa Koster, I'm a psychologist. This is me. Are there any questions? No? Because I think this is the most boring slide of my entire story, but if there are any questions, I will be more than happy to answer them. No? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to talk today about unconscious behavior, about some exploitable biases that we have as human beings that social engineers gladly misuse, about some social engineering techniques and how they actually make use of these biases, then some influence model, how to influence behavior of yourself, but maybe also of your colleagues to get the security awareness somewhat higher, and of course a wrap-up. So let's start out with unconscious behavior. Well, every one of us, every day, has to make like a lot of decisions. And these can be very big decisions, like should I sell my house? Should I switch jobs? Should I erase all the data? Should I buy a new laptop? Should I end my relationship? And very small decisions, like you're walking in this venue, where am I going to sit during lunch? What sandwich am I going to have when I'm crossing the street? Am I going to do it here or 1 meter to the right? Like all these small decisions. So, well, actually, I hope you don't make all these big decisions every day, because then your life would be very stressful. But on average, there are a lot, and it's about 35,000 decisions every day. So that's really a lot of decisions. You can imagine, if you're thinking about your own life, that you won't be able to make all these decisions based upon like rational thinking. We all think we're very rational human beings. We like to think of that. We like to think that we have free will. We like to think that we are very good at weighing pros and cons of every decision. And we are actually, but not 35,000 times a day. That's impossible. 24 hours will not be enough, and our mental capacity will not cope with this. It's not possible. So, in the evolution of humankind, there have emerged kind of two systems to deal with these 35K a day. And these are like two systems of thinking. So it's something different than your left and right hemisphere. Don't think of that, please. But these are decision systems. And there's a fast system and there's a slow system. So, first of all, the slow system, this is the system that we use for analytical thinking, for cognitive high-demanding tasks, for making these decisions that we really have to think about. This is also the system that we think we use all day long, because it's so effortful, it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of energy. But in fact, like we said, we determined earlier, it's impossible with 35,000 a day. So the other decisions have to be made also in some kind of way, because we have to make these decisions, because we have to live and we have to do stuff, we have to work, we have to whatever. So then we get to the fast system. And the fast system is like an unconscious system. We call it a heuristic system. It's based upon certain sets of rules, like software. Something goes in terms of a stimulus, and it could be either a face I'm seeing, or a color, or a smell, or an email that I'm getting that is getting me to click on a certain link, or a USB drive that's lying around somewhere. So these can be all kinds of inputs, and based upon these sets of rules, something comes out in terms of behavior. So what psychologists do is they examine what kind of input is necessary to get a certain kind of behavioral output. And when you know that, when you've researched that, then you can use it to influence the behavior. So these two systems are actually called System 1 and 2. Very original, but very good to remember. System 1 is like the fast system. It's unconscious. Some errors happening there, but that's not that bad, because the pros outweigh the cons, let's say. Just the fact that we can make all these decisions. System 2, slow, conscious, and effortful. So if you look at like the balance between these two, you will see, in contrary to what we like to believe, that most decisions are actually made in our fast thinking, our System 1. 95 to 99% of everyday decisions are being made like a robot. And now I know there are some of you who are thinking, wow, I'm like an engineer, I'm pretty technical, so for me it will probably be 50-50. No. For you as well. But you just might as well know it, because then you at least know that you can do something about it, or you can explore them and challenge them. So what are these like fast decision systems? Well, let me give you a few examples. If a person in a lab coat, in a white coat, says you should do something, then what? Then what? You do it, right? I said, oh, see all these people thinking, oh, this is a trick question. If I say yes now, I will be so weak. No, this is good, you know. Usually it's a literal white coat, like a doctor, but also, it could be like a figuratively speaking white coat. And this is an expert, somebody who knows more about the topic than you do. So this is actually a very good way to deal with all these decisions that we have to do every day. If we don't know something, we tend to look at what an expert says that we should do, which is an excellent way to reduce doubt in our head. Or this one. If a lot of people are saying or doing something, then it should be right. We should follow, right? most cases, I don't like to follow the herd, I'm not like a group person, mass behavior, whatever, yeah. But again, I mean, these tend to be interpreted as very, very negative, but these are actually very good, you know. If we don't have time and cognitive effort available to us to make a well-informed decision, it's a very good strategy to either follow what an expert is saying or look at what other people are doing, preferably in the same situation and preferably people that we have something in common with. Like if we as a team were to go outside now and like half of you would look up, then probably the other half of you would look up too. Because there's probably something there. But if we were to go outside and there will be like a bunch of children across the street looking up, then probably less of you would look up because these are people that we have less in common with. Even though that there will always be people who are looking up, but the fact that we have something in common actually amplifies this mechanism. So we call these heuristics or biases in psychology. And these were just two of them. There are actually much more. And I'm not going to discuss these all, of course. But these are basically the things that psychologists found out. And also these are the things that social engineers tend to use in their war repertoire. Not all of them, but okay, let's examine a few of them that are kind of dangerous. So, dangerous biases exploited by social engineers. First of all, we have the authority bias. This is the white coat, so we already talked about this. You know, if somebody who you think is a legitimate authority says something, you are inclined to follow their lead, to do whatever they say. What you see is that 2 out of 3 people will do this. You know, there have been done like dozens of experiments going back to 1963, which were the Milgram studies. You know, you might have heard of that with the shocks, people having to give shock to each other, etc. And every replication experiment after that, they always come to the conclusion that between 60 and 65% of the people will follow the lead of what they consider to be an expert. So social engineers use this, of course. They just pretend to be an expert. And they make some kind of arrangements that if this person has in doubt and he starts looking around, that they will see some verification that this person is an expert. And they will just, you know, like transfer the money, like with CEO fraud cases. So the second one is consistency. We tend to want to behave consistently. If we have done something in the past, we tend to do the same thing in the future, even if the task or the request is much bigger. So how can you use this? Well, first of all, let's say in plain English, it would be like in for a penny, in for a pound. I think that's a figure of speech that's being used. How can you use this? Well, you can either figure out if your target has already done something in the past that is kind of like similar to what you want them to do now. For instance, open an email, get a USB stick, get somebody invite somebody into the office building or whatever. And when making the request, the B request, remind them of that previous action. And if you remind them, then they will get this feeling like, okay, I want to be a consistent person, you know. If I were not to comply now, this would seem strange. This other person might think, but you've done this in the past. It's really strange of you if you wouldn't do this like request now. So we want to behave consistently internally, but also externally towards others. This is a research study. Due to time, I've skipped a lot of research studies, but this one I wanted to share with you. This is a research study done by the American Cancer Society, in which they investigated how they could raise the number of volunteers for, you know, you have that maybe here in Latvia too, the door-on-door collecting money, you know, going door to door with a can and people putting their money in. You know that? Yeah, you do? Yeah? Okay. So it's like a volunteer job, raising money for a good cause. But they noticed that every year there were less and less volunteers because everybody's busy, everybody has full calendars, etc. So they thought, okay, before we send this letter to all our charity donators, let's see if we can use this principle. So before they sent out the big letter, they took the half of their list of donators, yeah. And they sent them a small survey 1 week in advance. And this survey was really like half a page. You know, it was like, do you still know us? Did you see our latest campaign on television? Do you think we're still doing a good job? You know, some kind of like bullshit questions. It didn't even matter what questions were in the survey. What they wanted is they wanted these people to pay a small amount of attention and effort and put some effort into the American Cancer Society by either looking at the envelope, opening it and reading it, maybe even filling out the survey, putting it back in another envelope and sending it back. They did not even measure what people did. They just sent them out to half of the crowd and imagined that they would pay some kind of effort. Then, after a week, they sent out this big request, like, you want to help us, you know, with the fundraising and stuff like that. And what they found out is that in the group that had received the questionnaire 1 week earlier, 7 times as much people were willing to give up their time to go and collect funds. 7 times as much. That's really, really much more. What's happening? Well, these people, they are thinking, okay, so I've already done something for this cancer society. It would be strange if I would not comply with this next request that they're giving me. You might think that people will be like hesitant because they would think, but I've already done this last week, so why should I do it again? Well, that's a legitimate reason. Fortunately, it doesn't work like that. People will kind of get the urge to comply even a second time. All right. Loss aversion. Loss aversion is basically a version of anxiety. And anxiety, as we know in psychology, is one of the most powerful behavior drivers that we know. People will go miles and miles to avoid being like anxious about something. And loss aversion is basically using this anxiety. What loss aversion does is it taps into our feeling that we don't want to lose stuff that we already have. Like, for instance, our identity, or money, or salary. You know, this is the guy asking, could you please give your ID and password to reconcile your salary data? And this person is thinking, oh, if I don't do this, I might lose my salary. So if you can get people to think about what they might lose if they don't comply with your request, they will be much more motivated than if you would just ask them in the open. This makes use of a theory in which I'm not going to go into details, but it basically says that we are twice as motivated not to lose something that we have already gotten than to gain something of equal worth. So instead of giving them a present, it's better to point out what they will lose if they don't do this. Yeah. Because there's a reason is a fun one. By the way, you can use all these techniques like in your daily lives too. If you go out tonight in the club or whatever, you know, they're being used by social, but they're being used by marketers and by everybody. Because there's a reason. This technique actually says that if we ask a person or suggest a person some kind of action, and we tell them the reason that we're suggesting it, or the reason that they should do it, then they will be much more inclined to do it, even though the reason might be like a bullshit reason. So they tested this in a copy shop. You know, in a very busy copy shop, people go there to make copies, right? Okay, so in the first situation, they asked a woman to skip the line. It was a very busy copy shop, skipped the line. And while she was skipping the line, she was instructed to say a sentence. Excuse me, I have 5 pages, may I use the Xerox machine? While she was like pushing the other guy to the side. Well, this is no reason, and of course, you know, everybody has to make copies there, so still about 60% of the people complied with this, which I thought was pretty much, but you know, there's kind of like a decency effect or whatever. Then she was asked to do the same thing and give a legitimate reason. So she said, may I use the Xerox machine? Because I'm in a rush. That could be interpreted as like a legitimate reason, right? Okay. Well, a lot of people agreed. So 94% of the times she was like allowed to skip the line and make her copies. Then in the third instance, she was also asked to give a reason, but this time it should be like a non-valid or a bullshit reason. So same sentence, because I have to make copies. Yeah, right, everybody has to make copies there. That's what it's a copy shop for. And still, 93% of the people, of the times, it was seen as like a legitimate reason. So the catch is, if you want somebody to do something, give a reason why they should do it, or why, at least why you're asking to do it. The principle behind this is probably, they haven't figured it out entirely, but it's probably something like if you are like spending enough effort to come up with a reason, you would not do that if there was no reason. So people will interpret this as, okay, there is a word because in there, so if the word because is in there, it's probably legitimate. And then our brain switches off. And it's just accepted. Yeah. So the next one is called the unity effect. And the unity effect says that we are much more inclined to comply with a request made by somebody that we feel similar with, like I said earlier. Similar with, or that we have some kind of unity or identity feeling with. So in this experiment, this is a spoiler of course, but in this experiment they looked at a certain task that two persons had to like ask each other, and they were siblings. And in one situation, the one sibling was asked just to convince the other person to do it. And in the other situation, same thing, but then they would have to empathize the fact that they were like brothers, or brother and sister, or some kind of family cue. And you see that it's about 4 times more effective. Once you point out that you have some kind of unity, some kind of identity similarity with the other person, or it's a little bit a lighter form, you have like a commonality, like maybe you both work at the same company, you live in the same streets, you both have the same like anxieties that you are dealing with or whatever. It creates a bond, and people tend to respond to that bond more favorably. Then we have social proof. Social proof is basically the people looking up, like we discussed earlier. When in doubt, which happens about 35,000 times a day, we tend to look at what similar other people are doing to determine our next course of action.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before.
Yeah, nice, huh? So it's possible. Yeah, well, there are elevators here, right? So, you know, you can like try it out. You see this online too, online marketing, like Amazon, and you would look at the book and it would say, customers who bought this item also bought. You know, this is like social proof. People tend to look at what other people are doing. Okay. Reciprocity is the give and take principle. We tend to respond favorably to people who give us something. So you should really look at like what you can give. And this is also, again, what social engineers do. They tend to help you out with something. And in return, you feel kind of obliged to return the favor. They did this like with questionnaires. They sent out a regular questionnaire. 34% of the people responded. They attached a little note, just a little present, a little piece of like effort, and then the response rate doubled. So let's look at some of the social engineering tactics that actually make use of these biases. So reverse social engineering. Reverse social engineering is basically getting someone to need your help. So the social engineer here will kind of corrupt the system, and then he or she will wait for you to call him so that you can be like very helpful. Yeah, waits for you to ask for help. So basically this makes use of the AB principle, the commitment and consistency principle, because the social engineer probably knows that in the past he's already done something similar, and also loss aversion. Because if your system is corrupt, you're really anxious to not lose your data, not lose your work, not lose your, like, whatever. And then this person will help you. Oh, wow. This is interesting. Yeah. And now somebody comes offer help. That would be a good one. Yeah, here it is. Okay. Piggybacking, I think you've already discussed this earlier today, like going after somebody and like maybe even asking them to hold the door, which is like a brutal version of this. And it makes use of the unity effect, because if somebody walks behind you and goes through the same door, you tend to think that they have some kind of commonality. They work at the same building, work at the same thing, whatever. We tend to think that, so we just do it. Authority. Like I told you earlier, the CEO fraud. This is, are you busy? I need you to process a wire transfer or whatever. So the social engineers assumes the identity of an authoritative figure, and often this is done in combination with phone spoofing. So if somebody calls up to verify, the social engineer will have like rerouted the phones to be able to like confirm their own authority. So authority. And often also because as a reason. They will probably give you, it was not in this email, but they will probably give some kind of reason that the wire transfer needs to be done like today. Tech talk, also phone intrusions version. Social engineer will like pretend to be a tech guy or tech girl and overflow the person with so many technical questions that they will be glad that the social engineer can just like take over the system when he or she says, oh, but you know what, let me show you. And this person will go like, oh yeah, please, asking for very technical techniques. Why don't I take over your system for a minute? So basically he's offering a solution, and this person is more than glad to accept it. In terms of giving out like control over their own system. Then you have phishing, of course, phone calls, large kill usually, money transfers, etc. Also, again, the same techniques, and the version of phishing that you've heard earlier, I think in this morning, is called spear phishing, which is kind of like the version of phishing that's very much directed onto a certain person. Usually one target, requires a lot more of preparation, and makes use of like all kinds of techniques. Like the unity effect is usually there, loss aversion is usually there, because anxiety is one of the most powerful like behavioral motivators, because as a reason, and also some kind of reciprocity, give and take. Then you have your plain old friendliness. It makes use of the reciprocity about the give and take. Somebody being friendly to you, so you feel kind of obliged to do something back. Yeah. Okay. These last ones are less interesting, so I think I will skip them. I have to, yeah? Or do I have 1 minute, 2 minutes? If I have 1 minute, I can do that. Yeah? Okay. I just want to give you a heads up about these, because these are models that entire books have been written about. One is called intervention mapping, and it's actually a methodology to get people to change their behavior. So these are the things that you can do to have your colleagues or your employees like change their behavior in terms of security awareness and being a secure employee. So in intervention mapping, you always start out with the current and desired behavior. What's the current behavior? Current behavior is people are leaving their passwords in yellow sticky notes on their monitors. Desired behavior is that they choose a password they can actually remember and not leave these things anymore. Then you are looking at the biases that we already talked about. It's like, what are the biases that they're using, why they're showing this behavior? Why are they actually doing it? So this is more the psychological area. Also with the theory research, and then you design a program that actually addresses these biases. So you're not going to set up like an awareness campaign because you want to change the behavior. Awareness is usually just a piece of a behavior change program. Awareness alone will not get you there. That's why I'm also a little bit wary of the term security awareness, because security awareness is not enough. So you create a program like that and you evaluate. Then last model is the fog behavior model, and this one kind of explains why people engage even in a certain behavior aside from the biases. So B.J. Fogg is a professor, Stanford University. He actually says that behavior consists of 3 elements: motivation, ability, and a trigger. Motivation is like these things like anxiety and these unconscious processes we talked about. Ability is a very important one we haven't discussed yet, and this is the one I want to point out for you. You should always check, do my employees or do my colleagues are able to perform this secure, more secure behavior. And able means, do they have enough time to do this? Do they have enough money? Do they have to buy new equipment maybe? Does it cost any physical effort? Do they have to walk around the building for 3 times before they enter, not to be sure that they're being piggybacked or whatever? If it costs them a lot of effort, they will not do this. Despite enforcing it, they will not do it. Does it cost a lot of mental effort? And is there a deviation from the social norm? Like, are other people doing it too, or are they the only ones who have to do it? Then they will not start doing it. And then finally there's a trigger, and that is basically the point in time that you set up your communication for getting your employees to start behaving more securely. So, let's wrap it up. We talked about oil, about motor oil, about psychology being the most important thing in society, at least to my opinion. We talked about unconscious behavior. We talked about, well, some biases that are like coming in handy or could be like a major security risk. We talked about some of the techniques that social engineers use and which biases they make use of actually. So you can determine for yourself if you're actually prone to these biases, or you can recognize them with your colleagues or your employees. And finally, we looked at some models like the intervention mapping model and the fog behavior model to give you some pointers on how to start changing this behavior. Okay, thank you very much.
So, time for questions? Yes.
You seem to know all those techniques. Are you prone yourself to those?
Yes, of course. I'm a human being. Now really, we are. All of us are. They've done some research about influencing people, but even telling them at the moment of being influenced that they were being influenced, and also what influence techniques were being used, versus a group that received like the same call to action, but was not being told that they were influenced, and the result was almost exactly the same. So we can know that we're being influenced, but still, if it comes to like loss aversion or stuff like that, we are kind of prone to like not take the risk. Yeah. Yeah.
Any further questions?
Hello. In this country, we believe that punishment is good instrument to motivate or organize people behavior. What do you think about that?
I guess it kind of depends on what kind of punishment. Because if you want, like for instance, if you want very simple behavior, then punishment or loss aversion could actually be a good way to do that. Like you will lose something of your whatever savings, or if you don't do this. But if you want like behavior, so I make a difference between behavior influence and behavior change. Like behavior influence is getting somebody to do something 1 or 2 or maybe 3 times, and behavior change is getting them to do it always by their own motivation. For the latter one, punishment is not a good option, because you want to tap into intrinsic motivation. You want to get people to do it by themselves and not stop doing it at the moment that the risk of punishment like fades away because there is a different boss or whatever. So for one time, yeah, it could be good. Now, I'm not like suggesting you should start hitting people, of course, but a very subtle way, and we know of these ways, of course. For behavior change, no, I would not recommend it.
Excellent. So time for coffee. You're definitely staying for a coffee break.
Yeah.
So if you didn't manage to ask your question now, please do it during the coffee break. And please join us for the closing session in the Omega Hall in, I think, 20 minutes.